Okay, well, I want to just start. I see Jim O'Hara is here. I'll play a reporter. Bishop Durick retired or resigned on March the 24th, 75. And there was an ecumenical meeting in Memphis of clergy, Protestant clergy from all across the state. Now, that would have been a couple of representatives from Nashville, the Nashville diocese, which included East Tennessee, a couple of representatives from the Memphis diocese, but all of the rest were Protestant clergy of the mainline denominations. The Southern Baptists would never join us in these things, the Church of Christ and the Pentecostals, but in any event, he had just announced his resignation, or the Holy See had announced it, and we went to Memphis. The presiding officer of the organization of the meeting got up. This is a statewide meeting, primarily of Protestant clergy, and he called the meeting to order, and he said, I cannot begin our meeting without recognizing the presence in our midst of Tennessee's moral leader for these 10 great years, Bishop Durick. And there was standing ovation. That probably would be hard to see that repeated. But that is one thing about his history. America Magazine, because of his interest primarily in civil rights, named him one of the 10 most promising bishops of 1970. So that's a little prelude. Joseph Aloysius Durick was born on October the 13th, 1914. He was ordained a priest on May 23rd, 1940, and he was consecrated auxiliary bishop of Mobile on March the 24th, 55, 40 years a bishop. At the time, he was the youngest bishop in the American church. He was installed as coadjutor of Nashville on March the 3rd, 64, named by the Holy See apostolic administrator of the Diocese of Nashville, January 26, 66, received the title of Bishop of Nashville, September the 4th, 1969, resigned March the 24th, 75, and died June the 26th, 1994. He would be questioned about his positions on various matters, and often he would respond, I stand with the church. Informally, I would add, he really felt that the church was the place to be, and that it had some great answers, not only in terms of dogmatic theology, but in terms of situations in human life. Mentioned some of the influences that affected him. I doubt if there were many. He went to college at St. Mary's Seminary and University in Baltimore. I doubt that things were that far along at that time. But then he went to Rome. I think this was a deciding moment in his life. He got to Rome. First of all, Pope Pius XI was on the chair, Peter, and had been there for several years when Durick got there. Very much embroiled in the general world situation. There had been the ascendancy, first of all, in Italy of Benito Mussolini, and then Adolf Hitler. As far as Italy was concerned, and they would have been in the heart of that in Rome, Italy had undertaken under Mussolini some military conquests of Ethiopia, Somalia, and Albania in the Balkans. Pius XI was concerned about all of these things, especially Ethiopia. And he made several gestures that the Ethiopian seminarians, for example, were sort of had his privilege. The seminarians over there, each national group has a specific cassock, kind of a uniform. He granted Ethiopia the right to white because he wore white himself. He was a very, very strong kind of figure. And not only with regard to international affairs, but with regard to civil rights, to rights of workers, and so on. That was one of his big themes, all revolving around the dignity of the individual person. In 1928, for example, the steel workers in Lille, France, went on strike. And they protested and called for better working conditions, fairer wage, better wage, benefits, and so forth. It got pretty bad. The Bishop of Lille, Achille Liernart, spoke in favor of the workers, and the owners of the steel mills and those big businesses, all Catholics, of course, they were outraged, and they went to Rome, and they saw Pius XI, and they told him that Bishop Liernart was befriending the workers, and that he was saying this, that, and the other, and they were saying this, that, and the other, and he was supporting them, and they demanded that Pius XI remove Achille Liernart as Bishop of Lille. So the Pope listened to them, and he said, "Gentlemen, thank you for this very thorough report of what is going on in Lille. You have convinced me to appoint Bishop Liernart to the College of Cardinals." At which point, a little bit later, the Cardinal Archbishop of Bordeaux, who had a more conservative outlook, went to Pius XI and said, "Holy Father, if you proceed with this nomination of Bishop Liernart to the cardinalate, I have no option other than to resign as a member of the College of Cardinals." And famously, Pius XI said, "Resignation accepted." He issued an encyclical, Quadragesimo Anno, in 1931, which very much stressed the rights, civil rights, human rights of individuals, proceeded into many economic matters and so forth. As far as the situation in Germany, he very cloak and dagger wrote a special letter to German Catholics in German, which began "Mit brennender Sorge," with burning lips. And he denounced many of the policies of the Hitler regime. He proclaimed the Feast of Christ the King about the same time that the parish was established. That's the reason they named the parish that. And it was a reaction to the personality cult of the dictators. He canonized Thomas More and John Fisher because they had withstood the prevailing cultures and governments in their particular areas, and in France of their particular era. He canonized Walter Bellarmine, who was one of the great authors in terms of democracy in political theory. And he was very ecumenical, especially with the Eastern Orthodox. And he tried to facilitate a reunion with Anglicanism. Now, those things, I think, were early influences on Durick. Then he rubbed shoulders in school with a series of other young men from the South, who themselves became bishops. I won't go into the list of them, but I wrote down 6. They, as I say, all became bishops of they were from southern dioceses and became bishops of southern dioceses: Baton Rouge, Raleigh, Jackson, Savannah, Atlanta, St. Augustine. And they were good friends of his and very much in his mindset. And then he came along as a young priest, and then as a young bishop. He was so young as a bishop. And he was affected by a movement that was beginning to take root, not springing forward into a giant tree, but taking root at that time in terms of interracial justice. And so this was rather important to him. He was still auxiliary in Mobile when the Second Vatican Council started. He was very active in the Conference of Bishops. He was on committees and so forth, and knew very well some of the movers and shakers and leaders. Was very much a churchman, very impressed by John the 23rd and by Paul the 6th and by the Second Vatican Council. Then things began to erupt in Alabama, and he became a part of a group of ministers, the Episcopal bishop, the Methodist bishop, rabbis, and so forth. And they came together, and there's this book about them. This is sort of about Durick, Blessed Are the Peacemakers. I don't know if you can still get it. I tried to get another copy from Amazon, and it was lost in shipment. So you might still be able to get one. But they, first of all, they wrote to a letter to Martin Luther King when everything was coming apart in Birmingham, and it was to them that that King responded with his famous letter from the Birmingham jail. Now, the author of this book that I showed you, Jonathan Bass, who is a professor of history at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, feels that that was the turning point in Durick's philosophy regarding race. I don't agree with that. I think it had an impact, but I think that what I just said about the Roman experience and so forth, he had begun to think about things long before that. He very much was involved in some of the struggles in Alabama. He was part of a delegation that went to the White House, in fact, to talk to President Kennedy about the situation. And he told me the story. There were about 6 or 8 of these ministers, the Episcopal bishop and so forth. One thing that is not told about Kennedy is very understandable. I mean, I can relate to it because my own family, but the Irish had very little use for Protestant ministers. And Kennedy very much was in that mold. Coming out of Boston, you can imagine. So they were all sitting in the Oval Office, and they were talking about civil rights and the situation in Alabama and so forth. And all of a sudden, the president said, "Well, gentlemen, I'm going to recess the meeting for a few minutes. I've ordered coffee, and just sit and be at ease, and we'll resume after we've had some coffee." So then he said, "Bishop Durick, may I see you privately?" So he led Durick over, the bishop used to tell it, he led Durick over behind the chair, in that oval French window arrangement they have there, or windows there. And he said, "Bishop, I don't know about these guys. Do they know anything what the hell they're talking about, these Protestants?" And the bishop said, "Well, Mr. President, they do." "Well, okay, but what do you think's going on in Alabama?" And he said, well, it's bad. And he said, Bishop, what do you think can be done? And Bishop Durick said, well, I think you can help. And Kennedy said, how can I help? And he said, well, I think if we put it on a religious basis, and if we got Billy Graham to have revivals in Mobile, Montgomery, and Birmingham, and talked about the human unity and so forth, it would help. And so Kennedy said, all right, I'll call him and we'll see if he goes. Well, he went. So that was the background. One thing that he did when the little girls were murdered in the 16th Street, 15th, what was it, Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, when the bomb went off, he went to the funeral. And it caused an outburst from people in Alabama and Catholics in Alabama. And they demanded that he be sanctioned and even be removed as auxiliary bishop of Mobile. And this protest was sent to Paul VI himself. And Paul VI responded by promoting him. So that was in his background. He, as far as African Americans themselves were concerned, he was born and bred in the South, had lived with segregation all his life, had begun to question it, as did these other bishops that I mentioned. He was very much aware of what blacks went through, and you name it. It's would take us all afternoon if we talked about it. One thing that I would mention was that lynching still was happening. He was very close to St. Bernard Abbey in Alabama, Coleman, the Benedictines. There's a story there. Abbot Ambrose of St. Bernard. I think he had come to Nashville, but wherever he was on a train, and the train was carrying a black prisoner from one point to the other, and the train was stopped. And it was stopped by a band of Ku Klux Klan people, and they dragged the black prisoner off the train, and they were going to lynch him right there beside the tracks. And Abbot Ambrose got off the train, and he went to the leadership of whoever it was, the Klan leaders, and the abbot knelt down on his knees before the Klansmen and pleaded for the man's life. Now, that took a lot of courage, because it's a wonder the abbot didn't go up on the tree next. But they didn't pay attention to him. They hanged the man. But that story went around. Those kinds of things were happening all over. Not much help from the federal government or the state government, because it was very much constrained by Supreme Court rulings, which were really overturned in Brown versus Topeka Board. He was appointed coadjutor bishop to Bishop William L. Adrian of Nashville, and was installed in March of 1964. That was, I'll get to that in a minute, but that was a very unfortunate time. I don't think that Bishop Adrian meant to be a symbol of resistance to civil rights and desegregation, but that was what people made him into. There were things happening in the church aside from civil rights, namely all of the actions of the Second Vatican Council, and the liturgy and all of that. Adrian did not agree with that, and Durick was very much supporting that. So Durick came in as as coadjutor, he did have the right of succession should Adrian resign or die. But other than that, he had no role to play in the diocese other than to confirm. And each year he ordained the new priests. That was it. And it was, he was really sort of shunted off to the side, even belittled. They had a meeting of the diocesan consultors right before he arrived, and they invited him to talk about his installation ceremony. And he came in and talked about that. And then, of course, Adrian was not present. He was in St. Thomas Hospital. And so after they got through, they said, well, Bishop, thank you for your time. You're excused. He was not really accepted. Adrian had been here so long, had been in Nashville so long. There was one moment after the other which made him feel unwanted and unneeded. And then it went along from 64 to 66. A lot of things happened, but in any event, on January the 26th, 1966, the Holy See intervened and withdrew jurisdiction of the diocese from Bishop Adrian and named Durick apostolic administrator. Well, in a way that, well, that certainly gave him canonical authority over everything, but it
Alexa, turn off the
help. It didn't help I mean, people who didn't want any of these changes, that didn't improve it much. But he came in and right away as apostolic administrator, he began to move. Now, I could name a number of things. I would just tell you people in Christ the King Parish, you do not live in the Niedergesetz Church. You do not live in the Chemic Church. You do not live in the Chobe Church. The Spalding Church has yet to develop. You live in the Durick Church, because everything in your parish, everything the way the diocese operates and so forth, everything traces back to Durick. So he came in and like a house of fire when he became apostolic administrator. One of the first things he did, I was in the seminary, one of the first things he did was lift the ban, the diocesan ban, on blacks entering the seminary for the Diocese of Nashville. If you were a black, the Diocese of Nashville would not accept you until 1966. He ordered the schools desegregated. Only 2 schools in the state, which was the whole diocese, were desegregated at the time, and that was Father Ryan High School at Nashville and Cathedral School, which is gone. He ordered all of the schools desegregated. Then he went to the black parishes, the exclusively black parishes. And those were what were called territorial parishes, personal parishes. And it was not, in other words, in, say, Madison County, wherever the black person lived, they were a member of St. Joseph's Parish. Not because it had parish lines, but because they were black. Well, he shut down these personal parishes and told them to go to territorial parishes. The parishes that he shut down would have been St. Joseph's in Jackson, St. Francis in Chattanooga, St. Thomas and St. Anthony's in Memphis, St. Augustine's and St. Anthony's in Memphis. That did not work well, despite the best of intentions. Maybe I'll say something about that later. They all had parochial schools, and so they were available to black children. They could go to even parochial high schools in Nashville or in Memphis. They desegregated the one Catholic high school in Chattanooga. But he was concerned about young adults. And so he went in very big for campus ministry. The campus ministry at Vanderbilt is from his day. St. John the 23rd Center in Knoxville on the UT campus. Memphis State, East Tennessee State in Johnson City. But he was also concerned about Black young adults. So he established campus centers, bought property, and they had a campus center at Tennessee State, and then another one that served the students at Fisk and Meharry. He was very good about bringing in religious orders, which Adrian had always frowned upon. That was another source of conflict. But he brought in the Dominicans to run Johnson City, brought in the Paulists to run Memphis State, and Franciscans from New York to run Meharry and Fisk, and then the other one was TSU. He was very much a champion of affirmative action. So not only with Blacks, but with women. Now we're talking about 1966. So these prestigious boards that he created, the finance board of the diocese is one. It had to have women, and it had to have Blacks. I remember he appointed the first women, and he appointed the president of Memorial Hospital in Chattanooga, Sister Frances DeSales, Mary Crimmins from Chattanooga, who owned a contractor's supply company. It's a lady from Nashville. I can't remember. She was an executive at Cutter's Exchange. And then Blacks. And if you had a committee of diocesan level, you presented names of nominees for membership to him, he'd say, well, tell me about these people. And then he'd just frankly ask, are they all white? Yes, Bishop, they are. Well, he used to have a phrase, got to have a little blackness, got to have a little blackness. And I think without that, it never would have happened. Then with regard to assets of the diocese, liquid assets, he started what was called Project Equality, put Father Bill Fleming, who later became rector of the cathedral, in charge of it. And that was to look at suppliers of diocesan needs and so forth, and see if they hired Blacks, how they treated Blacks and so forth. Very, very unpopular, but that's what he did. Catholic organizations, I won't embarrass anybody by naming any of them, but he leaned on them to bring Blacks in. That was absolutely, that was rough. And they just simply refused to admit Blacks to membership. How did he react? He would not attend their meetings. And then the matter of ecumenism, he embraced those religious denominations that themselves were more active with regard to civil rights, Jews, Episcopalians, and Methodists, and so forth. And beyond that, beyond civil rights, he wanted to reach out to Southern Baptists, since they're so prevalent in Tennessee, joined the Tennessee Association of Churches and so forth. And there were things along that line. The Shriners had a statewide convention in Nashville. They asked him to give the invocation, which he did. The diocesan convention, which is legislative in the Episcopal Church of the Diocese of Tennessee, asked him to address the diocesan convention, which he did. They asked him to be a guest at the installation of the bishop of the diocese, Episcopal diocese, and he went. All of these things were extremely controversial, and they probably won among his own people, won as many foes as they won friends. As far as his personality was concerned, we used to talk about it, those of us who were around him, but he had a remarkable insight into what was going to happen in the future. In this sense, he knew that liberation of women, and I say that in the sense of women being in professions and one thing, no, that was coming. He knew that the barriers of race were going to be broken down one day. He had an insight. His problem was he didn't always know exactly how to get there. Well, nobody did, but he was impatient to get there. He was extremely sensitive personally. When he was in a young priest, one of the students or young boys in his parish, St. Mary's in Mobile, later became Archbishop Oscar Lipscomb, who died a few months ago. He was a great friend of mine. And we used to talk about it, the Archbishop and I did, about how sensitive Durick could be. People reacting to him negatively was traumatic. And totally being rejected or scorned was traumatic. But it was interesting. He never ever let that slow him down. I think I mentioned it last time, but I remember the Episcopal Bishop of Memphis was retiring, and Durick and I were invited to Memphis for a dinner in his honor, and we went down, and the dinner was at Justine's restaurant. I don't know whether it still exists, but it was one of the premier restaurants of Memphis at that time, and we flew down, and I rented a car, and we drove over to Justine's. And so I asked the receptionist there, I said, I guess I did, we're here for the Episcopal Diocese dinner. And they said, well, they're in the private dining room, you have to go. So we had to walk through the main dining room. Well, as we were walking through the main dining room, I noticed out of the corner of my eye a very prominent and very wealthy, by the way, Tennessee Catholic was at a table over here. He was in Memphis for some reason or another. And he arose from his table and came over to where we were walking. And I thought he was just going to say hello. I can see him right now. He walked up and he shook his fist in the bishop's face. And he said, I want to tell you something. You've been trying to ram these N-words down our throats. And I want you to know I'm sick of it. And I'm not going to give the Diocese of Nashville one more dime. And Bishop Durick said, that's your privilege, and kept walking. But that is the kind of thing that would have stung him very much. But he would not back down. Conflicts were very, very intense at the time, and they were very hard for him to take. The response, I would have to say, was, I don't have any way to quantify it, but the majority of Catholics probably felt him out of place or an embarrassment or a nuisance, precisely because of race. And then the clergy. That would have applied, and it created very much an age problem in the clergy. The pastor to whom I was assigned, things were going on. I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, dinner that night. The next night he was assassinated and died in the evening. The next night, of course, the whole nation outside the South was stricken. And my pastor said, he's nothing but a DAM N-word preacher. And so there was a real division. And of course, not only with race, that had a role to play, but the whole thing with Vatican II and all of that, it was very much crystallized in a synod. Durick called a synod, 1968. We met at St. Bernard Abbey in Alabama and voted on a variety of things. And, it was like the Republicans, Democrats in the U.S. Senate. I mean, the young ones could have sat on this side, myself being one. We would have sat on this side of the aisle, the older ones on the other. And so you had a vote, an actual vote on matters. And that sort of crystallized the division. But in general, he started out in a bad situation. I mentioned about the consultors. Adrian was outstanding in so many respects. He was, the diocese was almost bankrupt at the time of the Depression. Bishop Adrian came in. He had been president of St. Ambrose University in Davenport. He knew his numbers. I remember when I went into college, my father took me to open a checking account in my name. And old Third National Bank, I don't know who has it now, but they've all changed. But Dad was a good friend of Walter Deal, who was the chairman of the board. They'd gone to school together. And so we went in the bank and we went to see Mr. Deal. And so Mr. Deal called somebody in to open the account for me. And he said, Owen, what are you going to do or something or other? And I said, well, Mr. Deal, I want to be a priest. I'm going to college and then I'm going to be a priest. So he told me, that was very fine. And he said, I want to tell you, Owen, he said, you're a bishop, Bishop Adrian. He said, he's the smartest businessman in the city of Nashville. Well, Adrian ran all of the business in the diocese. They had a man there who was the CFO, but he signed checks and paid bills and recorded transactions. But Adrian was the man with the stock. He was the man with real estate. He was everything. And he, with his own expertise in finance, he brought the diocese out of near bankruptcy. He was that. He responded to the boom after the Second World War in Memphis, which was the powerhouse at that time, and in Nashville. New parishes, I don't know how many created in Memphis, probably a dozen. One thing after the other. But he was, civil rights came on. He did desegregate Father Ryan High School, but that was the end of that. He desegregated nothing else. And he was so opposed to the Second Vatican Council. Well, Durick came in. Adrian, by the way, Adrian was not doing too well. On Pentecost Sunday in 1966, I got a call. I was in the seminary. Another seminarian from the parish was Pat Thompson. We got calls to come and serve the bishop on Pentecost. And he had a very a low mass, as they used to call him. Well, during the night, he suffered a stroke. And so for the next 8 years, he was a patient in St. Thomas Hospital. Well, something had to give. Well, they appointed Durick as the coadjutor. He came in. all wound up about the Second Vatican Council. He was eligible to go to the council as a bishop, but Adrian said, well, it's a waste of time and nonsense and whatever he said, but he said the Diocese of Nashville will not pay your way. And so Durick wanted to go, and he called his old boss, the Archbishop of Mobile, who was a tough Irishman from Baltimore. And the Archbishop had some well-chosen words for Adrian. But he said, Joe, you plan to go to the council, Mobile will pay your way. And all of these humiliations that he went through. And then Bishop Adrian, I don't think, as I said, I don't think he meant to be the center of resistance, but it sort of turned out that way. And he wrote a column every week in The Wanderer, which is a very conservative Catholic publication publishing at that time. And it was just total opposite from what the council was saying or what Durick was saying. So those things were problems. He endured that. Durick endured that kind of humiliation for 2 years. Given his personality, probably it was very difficult, and it compounded the resistance that he got, since we're talking about race, to these racial policies that he instituted. All being said, as I said a moment ago, of our 12 bishops, this bishop has only been on a short time. Nobody knows how this present episcopacy is going to develop. But he, as far as a leader in the state, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's never been a Catholic prelate in Tennessee now, including the bishops of Memphis or Knoxville, who had his statewide stature that Durick had. He was a national figure. When he died, the New York Times had a big story about him. And he sort of just pressed these things forward, and ultimately most of them succeeded. Many of them did not. Many of his innovations that, as he left, when he left, they were all shut down. Certainly the affirmative action attitude that he had, that's gone or went. The campus ministries at TSU and Fisk, they were shut down, closed, the property sold. Now you notice, blacks noticed this, but the campus ministry at UT in Knoxville was not sold and shut down. The campus ministry at East Tennessee State in Johnson City was not sold and shut down. The campus ministry at the University of Memphis was not sold and shut down. The campus ministry at UT Martin was not sold and shut down. But the campus ministries at Fisk and at TSU were sold and shut down. Now, the argument for that was that they depended upon diocesan subsidy to operate. Well, frankly, so do the others. So blacks remember those things. And I don't know that, well, anyway, the affirmative action thing faded out. I think the point was that the press that he had, that he pushed for, with regard to equality and civil rights, that sort of faded out. Not in the least that it was repudiated. I don't mean that they suddenly, the position of the diocese suddenly became segregationist, certainly not. But that fire in the belly that he had was gone. And so that was Bishop Durick. He lived on, I have here somewhere where he died, the time when he died. He lived on for a number of years. was in the 90s, died 94. One thing that had been his interest was prison reform. And that was sort of put aside. But he left the position of Bishop of Nashville. He was still a young man, comparatively speaking. He was 60 years old, and he said that he wanted to continue to be a priest. Well, he signed on with the federal prison system to be a chaplain. That's hard work. And he did that until his health got so poor, had heart trouble, other things, moved back to Alabama. He rarely came back to Nashville. He came back. One of his great friends in Chattanooga, because that was part of the diocese, was a man by the name of Edward Steiner. He was the grandfather of Father Steiner and Aaron Franklin. And then his son, also Edward, the priest, is the third. And so when Father Steiner, the pastor of St. Philip's Franklin, when he was ordained, I think, when was it? In the 80s? No, yeah. But anyway, when Durick came back for that was the only time he came back, other than the 150th of the diocese. And then there was another time. He wrote to Bishop Niedergesetz and asked if, when he was 50 years a priest, if he could celebrate it in Nashville. And Bishop Niedergesetz agreed. And then he put in his will that he wanted to be buried in Nashville. Bishop Kimmich had come in and was much more gracious to him than had been previous times. And he insisted that he indeed be buried from the cathedral, and he's buried at Calvary Cemetery. But he kind of stayed away from Tennessee. I don't know what that was. He would have been busy in the prison. But he was an interesting person. You have to have, I think, when you change longstanding opinion and habits, you have to have someone who takes the bull by the horns, and he did. Personally, as far as his personality is concerned, I mean, personal feelings, it cost him a tremendous, cost him a great deal. Maybe that's one reason he rarely returned to Nashville. But he's an interesting guy. I want to close, since we have 2 minutes, with you folks at Christ the King. I've enjoyed being with you these 2 weeks. I want to, if I may be so bold, I want to leave you with 2 words of advice. First of all, question the culture that you live in. People question the church, question the culture, question the conventions, question popular opinion. Put the questions hard and direct. The problem was with the Durick years, when they tried to have some kind of adjustment of the attitudes about race and the inferiority of blacks and segregation, the Catholic population and the priests too many times were falling into the culture. Watch that. It's very dangerous. The other thing that Durick did, and that occurred because of what I called affirmative action, which is an ugly phrase for many people, but listen actually to people who are having the experiences, not reporters, but people who actually are living through the experiences. So when you hear something about Black Lives Matter, don't presume because of what you hear, but look at it because you have heard what Black people say about it, because they are experiencing what they're complaining about. And then on the basis of that, you can come to some kind of decision. Finally, since we have 1 minute, I want to thank John again for inviting me to be a part of these conversations. I'm sorry we had that little delay at the beginning, but in any event, it's been very pleasant for me. I've enjoyed it. I hope all of you have a good weekend and what's left of it. And I want to congratulate Christ the King and salute you on looking at the matter of race in our country. We're far from resolved, and trying to blend that into some decision that is built on the gospel. So God bless all of you. And John, thank you very much.
Thank you, Monsignor. If you'd all unmute, I think applause is definitely warranted. So thank you very much.
Oh my goodness.
Monsignor, do you have time for a few questions? I know we're at time, so any of you who need to leave, please do
Yes.
so. You can either respond verbally or vocally, or you can throw up your questions in the chat and I will mediate those.
Well, I'll just leave it on this. So tell me what's going on. What questions?
Did he go away?
No, I don't think.
I hear somebody.
John, I've got one quick one for you, Monsignor. This is Gino.
Hey, Gino.
If I'm not mistaken, Bishop Durick started the parish councils for everyone after Vatican II. I remember going to a meeting in Memphis and another one in Knoxville where, believe it or not, I was representing the youth.
Oh, no. Was that back in the day,
organization.
Gino, when you served my mass at the cathedral?
Exactly.
I know your brothers did. You probably did.
Yep.
He did. He brought in, this is a name that, Gino, that you're going to recognize. He brought in Jim Walsh. Jim was a lawyer. And then Jim later went to the prosecutor's office, didn't he? Davidson County?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He retired there.
Well, you know, Gino, you know whom I'm speaking of.
Yeah.
Well, he set up an office, Durick did, in the diocese, put Jim in charge, and they started the parish councils. I told you a minute ago that we're living in the Durick Church. So all these parishes like Christ the King that have parish councils, that was with the inspiration of Bishop Durick and Jim Walsh. Then Jim left the job and went back into law.
Yeah. Good.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah.
Father,
Here's you.
Monsignor, can you say just a bit more about why he left the diocese so early at age 60 rather than 75?
Yes, I will expand on that a little bit. I'm going to tell you something. This book right here has it. He really began to show the effects of stress. And it became very obvious. He was asked to come to Washington. I remember the date because it's my father's birthday. He was asked to come to Washington on March the 20th, 1974. And the nuncio at that time, who was the papal representative, was a French-speaking Belgian, Archbishop Jean Jadot. French-speaking Belgian, neither here nor there, but he was the he was the man, and so he had, I'm sure, received a lot of letters or whatever, and Bishop Durick really was overwhelming him, and I would say a large part of that was the reaction. And so Jadot said, and this is from Durick himself, because I met his plane when he came back. Jadot said, "This job is killing you. And I cannot stand here and watch it happen. And I'm telling you, as a brother bishop, you've got to resign. It's killing you. It's destroying you." And so Jadot offered the possibility, since he was only 59 at that time, they retire when they're 75. He offered the possibility of, why don't you take a year of it, and then we will announce on your 20th anniversary as a bishop that you have petitioned the Holy Father after 20 years of Episcopal ministry to resign, and the Pope has accepted your resignation. And that was what happened. The Bishop Durick, sat down with Jonathan Bass and was very frank, and obviously was not there, but I have talked to Bass, and was very frank about the whole thing. A lot of things about the Adrian years and whatever. So anyway, that, I hope, answers that question.
Thank you.
And Senior, this is Bill Farmer. Did
Bill.
the bishop have a personal relationship with Dr. King?
Well, let me be very honest. Yes, he knew him. They did not always see eye to eye on some particulars. I only met King once, and that was in the company of Bishop Durick. We were going somewhere, and we were in the Atlanta airport, and we ran into Dr. Martin Luther King, and Bishop Durick introduced me. I won't say they were on different sides of the fence, but they were certainly allies. They were not, I don't think you'd say they were real close, but there was no animosity between them.
A question. Oh, go ahead.
Jim Zeralik, Monsignor Campion.
Oh my goodness, Jim, you remember some of this stuff.
I'm really impressed with the treatment you gave that subject. That was an amazing insight. Thank you very much.
Jim, you were there to remember him.
Yeah.
To second that comment, Jeannie Marchetti asks if you'd consider please writing history.
Oh,
Catholic Church, Tennessee.
I was going to say,
yeah, I appreciate it.
Monsignor, I believe Father Zralik, then Father Zralik, taught you history. So I think you just got an A in his course.
Well, he taught me American history. It was great.
Maureen Schlachter asks, if you were bishop now, that would be a very good question. If you were bishop now, what would he be doing? But I would ask you too, if you were bishop now, what would you be doing?
Me?
Well, let's start with Durick.
Me, if I were bishop?
Let's start with Durick. If he were alive and bishop now, what would he be doing? But then also you.
Well, what I think he would be doing, assuming he had the same point of view, I imagine he would be very much behind the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm sure he would have, I guess, would have continued in his insistence that blacks be a part of the community in a very real way and in leadership. I don't want to get in. I have a lot of friends among the hierarchy. I don't know. I don't want to get in any put them down or whatever. But I think that the church has to take a stand where there is evil. And I think race has been such a burden. We keep talking about the society. Well, that's very true, but Black people have gone through so much and still going through so much, and all these memories. We don't have the memories. And so we can't relate to it, but what would I do? I think I would do exactly what I said at the conclusion of my remarks. I would call upon people to question the culture, and I would call upon people to listen to the mistreated.
Monsignor. Spencer Mullins recommends a book along these lines called Authentically Black and Truly Catholic,
Uh-huh.
The Rise of Black Catholicism. Yes,
Yes.
here it is. A very good text.
That cracks me up.
Spencer, who I believe is also a Knight of Columbus, asks about, and we'll call this our final question, asks about the bishop's relationship with the Knights of Peter Claver, and asks if you are concerned about by the Knights of Columbus not doing enough on race relations and civil rights. And again, this is coming from a Knight of Columbus.
I'm a Knight of Columbus also, but I may, Jim O'Hara is still there. I may as well, Jim, be a reporter. That was one of the organizations that Bishop Durick had problems with.
Okay.
About inviting Blacks to be members.
Very, very much so. Very.
Knights of Columbus.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you said, okay, cool. I had no idea.
Not Peter Claver. Obviously. Anything else, folks? I have a luncheon appointment in 19 minutes.
Well, we won't keep you. Just know that we're very grateful for your service to the church on this day to our particular parish. And we wish you good health, good spirits, and we hope to have you back someday.
Well, I thank you, and I want you to remember in prayer a friend of mine, now Cardinal Wilton Gregory of Chicago, a great champion of human rights and civil rights, and he's just been honored by the Holy Father as being named to the cardinalate. So I was talking about him this morning, and so Bishop Choby's seminary classmate. So in any event, it's been wonderful being with all of you. I see Tom Behan had a message there. Tom is a cousin of mine, and I hope everybody is well, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Monsignor.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye.